Welcome to the Entertainment Room, where I am finally getting to episode 2 of my quick movie reviews. As I stated in my first episode of this segment, these are films I didn't want to dedicate entire episodes to for one reason or another, but I wanted to put some quick thoughts out there. I won't get into spoilers in each film section. If I choose to go into spoilers, if I think of anything, I will include a section at the end, but otherwise, it's just going to be my quick thoughts, spoiler free. But my wife and I recently have been watching a shit ton of movies, mostly action films, but there are some exceptions in there. And two of these films are newer, still in theaters at this time. One just came out this past weekend. So today we have The Fall Guy, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, Unlocked, Greenland, and Meg 2, The Trench. And there are more than these that we have seen in the past week or so, but I'll save that for another part. But I'm excited to discuss these and potentially recommend them, most of them. So let me know what you think of this segment and these reviews. Let's get started. My first film today is 2024's Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Of course I love the original. It's solid 80s cheese, fun with notable performances. The second one is one of those I haven't yet gotten around to seeing for some reason, but moving on to Afterlife. I actually enjoyed Afterlife more than I thought I would. It wasn't amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but it still was highly entertaining. And unfortunately for me, Frozen Empire was far from an improvement on that one. Now don't get me wrong, this wasn't a bad movie to me, just more forgettable. If you didn't enjoy those newer generations of teenage characters in Afterlife, I highly doubt you're going to enjoy them any more here. I again liked them more than I expected in the previous film, but in this one I just didn't feel nearly as invested. And they were even a little more irritating in places. I couldn't even pinpoint it most of the time. I just didn't find myself caring nearly as much. Aside from the original cast, who once again has returned, except this time more involved than the previous film, the charisma just wasn't there as much. Now, I love Paul Rudd as an actor, as a comedian, but I was a bit annoyed even by him this time around. Parts of the happy-go-lucky, awkward stepdad with no backbone shtick just didn't land a lot of the time. Dialogue and one-liners in general just didn't hardly hit ever in a unique way or an interesting way. And this isn't really a spoiler, but one of my least favorite moments in this film was when Phoebe, the main teenager, delivers this average one-liner before shooting a ghost, and Paul Rudd's character just goes, "Oh, that was cool. You have to admit that was awesome what she just did." And number one, no, it wasn't. But even if it was this highly memorable or clever line, you will always instantly ruin it by pointing it out in your own movie. It almost feels like the writers were just begging for validation on that moment. Like, hey, audience, that was cool. What we just said, right? You like what we wrote? You like that? Right? Please? But the characters in this story, they're not all bad. It is still a watchable movie for me. And I actually liked the countryside, the more rural environment in that previous movie, Afterlife. But I was actually really excited to be back in the big city this time around. And don't get me wrong, there are some decent sequences and some okay throwbacks to the original films. Also, when it comes to the Kumail Nanjiani character, I really enjoy this guy as an actor. I think he can be incredibly funny. He has expert-level sarcasm and dry wit. And for me, I just enjoyed his performance and character here. I can see many people maybe finding him a bit annoying, especially with how important his ultimate role was, and how over the top his character was, but I really don't care. When it comes to the humor, whenever I laughed in this film when I was supposed to, 95% of the time at least, it was because of something he said or did. So I really just don't have any complaints about his character so much, personally. As for that original cast, they are still really good here, of course, very nostalgic, and I enjoyed that they were incorporated into the story more. With the villains of this film, or the main villain, I won't go into too much at all, of course, but the creature, god, ghost, whatever. It's fine. The third act had its moments, but ultimately it was a bit underwhelming by the end of it. With the mayor character of the city as an added problem, apparently that subplot was either copied or partially inspired by the second film, I think. I can't remember exactly, but again, I haven't seen that one anyway. There's also this existential dilemma that's like one of the themes here. I knew this would come up before too long about, the afterlife, dying, the existence of these ghosts, moving on. It could have worked. I think it could, but here it's done in such a cheesy and uninspired way. There's this final conversation between two characters at the end, and it just left me feeling nothing. Like, okay, you made your point. Best thing about this exchange was that it was very short, but it was just whatever. But in all my issues, I can completely understand people liking this film more than I did. And it doesn't feel like they didn't try, it's not that. I just don't think they hit the mark they wanted. I think a lot of people do still feel that way. I did enjoy the dedication to Ivan Reitman, the original director of the first two films. His son Jason Reitman returns from Afterlife, again as a writer. And it's clear that this franchise does mean something to him. He's not just throwing these movies out for cash grabs. The film was also released 40 years after the original, which was cool. This installment still is fun in different places, just incredibly inconsistent. And I can see it being an easy rainy day or cold winter day watch for me in the future, maybe once or twice off and on. But for now, I'll give Ghostbusters Frozen Empire a 5.7 out of 10. The second film I'm covering today is the newest film on this list, and it was just released this past weekend, and that is 2024's The Fall Guy. Starring Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt. David Leitch is the director here, and he is also a former stuntman himself, and that's already a great aspect of this movie, an ode to stunt performers in cinema. We often see expertly done stunts in films, but it's easy not to pay too much mind to it outside of that moment it happens, and maybe just thinking, damn, I bet that shit hurt. And then we keep following the story. But there really is all this preparation and all this risk that goes into pulling off these stunts as safely as possible, and I'm happy this was the major plot point of this film. But the rest of the plot is that an actor has gone missing, got mixed up with some shady people, so Ryan Gosling's character, Colt, has to use his skills to try to figure it out so he can get the actor back, and time to finish this film. The film is also being directed by Colt's ex, Jodie, who is Emily Blunt. When it comes to the action and the main plot of this film, admittedly it's nothing super unique outside of the stunt performer focus, but that is not at all to undercut how fucking fun this movie really is. I had a great time, from start to finish. And there are still really great films coming out today, but still so many like these lack that charm to make you really remember the film and reference it past, a couple days later, up to a week later. It just gets hard to get past that point where you want to talk about a film again, just all the content that's being pumped out all the time. And honestly, a lot of action films, comedies, and even action comedies have gems occasionally these days, whether it's in theater or on streaming, but they're kind of few and far in between. It could be the writing, acting, editing, or a combination, or the selected actors just don't have that needed charisma to help drive the excitement of the film. But with Fall Guy, I feel like it has to be hard not to find the story, and its execution highly entertaining. It's also pretty funny in multiple places. I got quite a few laughs from it. And Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt do their damn thing. Both are super charismatic, have fantastic chemistry, and there are several cheesy moments, of course, a couple maybe a bit too long, but overall they help greatly to keep you invested. Again, the action and general plot isn't the most unique, but with entertaining sequences and bombastic effects and stunts, I can't stay mad at it, flaws and all. And several other actors also add a lot to the story and the overall value as well. Aaron Taylor Johnson, Hannah Waddingham, Winston Duke, just to name a few. Plus there are some surprise cameos that, of course, I won't name here. One of the main complaints I've seen and can kind of understand is that the first part of this film is longer than expected. And by that I mean the main conflict with Colt needing to find this missing actor. I didn't keep up with time, but it maybe takes at least half an hour or so to really get to that point where they start discussing that. And while the pacing like that can be frustrating with what's supposed to be your main conflict, this movie is never boring to me, so I didn't mind this extended setup. Plus, they were still building our two lead characters, their shared and individual histories, and a lot of that is owed to the witty writing, and again, the terrific performances. The Fall Guy really reminds me of many of those classic action films. They're filled with cheese in places, yes, but they're also just so memorable and thrilling, and just give you characters that you give a shit about. Plus, again, they have several moments where they find new ways to dedicate this film to those brave stunt performers. So if you go see this one, make sure you stick around for the mid-credit scene. Again, I won't spoil it. And I am ashamed, personally, to say that I didn't initially get the entire reference of that scene, what it was referring to. And a lot of that probably is due to my age and the fact that I didn't grow up with what's being referenced, but I still appreciate it after the fact. And many will likely recognize right away the greatness of this scene. But even if you don't, or even if you don't care, this scene also kind of wraps up the ending a little bit more, so stick around for that, if nothing else. But The Fall Guy is excellent satire on the film industry, and again, a great dedication to those brave stunt performers. Highly entertaining, I recommend it to pretty much anyone, so I'll get The Fall Guy an 8 out of 10. The third film on my list is most likely going to be the least well known. It is actually the first film in this recent binge my wife and I went on, and that film is 2017's Unlocked. It's an action thriller where a CIA interrogator finds herself in a dangerous situation where she has to figure out who all is involved in this plan to unleash a biological attack on London. I've never heard this film before, finding it on Peacock, and we honestly chose it after not knowing exactly what to watch, but the premise was interesting, and I knew personally that I admired Noomi Rapace as an actress who plays our lead, and she's likely best known for the original Girl the Dragon Tattoo trilogy, which is a great trilogy. But the top billed cast is also interesting, with the likes of Orlando Bloom, Toni Collette, John Malkovich, and Michael Douglas. And after giving it a shot, this was a surprisingly captivating CIA action film. I enjoy stories surrounding CIA operations because you often just never know who to trust. I can just imagine how screwed I would be just never trusting anyone ever and overthinking everything and everyone. So the suspense is often there. And all the main actors I named give consistent, convincing performances. The action scenes are again nothing super inventive or new, but they are convincing and competent as well, and still fun to watch. Noomi Rapace is absolutely believable as an action star. She often has that stern demeanor, but has shown plenty of versatility and emotion outside of that. The next quick movie review episode will likely have one or two other films where she's the lead. And as you can imagine, there are twists throughout, and most of them do work. There are maybe one or two that are a bit predictable. You know, if you followed stories like this before, there are a couple moments where you're like, yep, I already know where this is going to go later. But in general, it's a good story that rarely feels bogged down. And at the end, the villain motivation, you'll have to decide how you feel about it. I feel the decision making with these characters and their reasoning for doing what they do may be a bit dramatic, but it's not awful. I'm not saying it's all bad. And it won't ruin the movie for you, I don't think. I was just thinking, really? You got this problem? You're jumping to this level because of this? You think that's going to work? Okay. But if you feel like you've seen it all the action, spy, crime, thrillers, I bet there's at least a decent chance you have not seen this one, and it is a worthwhile watch. I'll give Unlocked a 7 out of 10. Film number 4 is a disaster film called Greenland, starring Gerard Butler, Morena Baccarin, and Roger Dale Floyd. And this family of 3 is trying to survive the apocalypse as multiple fragments from a comet are hurtling toward Earth, potentially wiping out the planet. When it comes to Gerard Butler, he has had some great movies under his belt, and action is his typical niche. And like a lot of big names, he also has some atrocious entries under his belt. London Has Fallen. Anyway, I do like him as a whole. And he was in another disaster film years ago called Geostorm, which I remember being pretty bad, so I was kind of wary going into this one. But with disaster films in general, it may be up for debate as to whether we have any genuinely amazing entries. But for me, though, my favorite may be Deep Impact. Armageddon and 2012 are admittedly guilty pleasures of mine, but I enjoyed them and I stand by them. And that's just to name a couple. But with Greenland, it came out in 2020 at the height of the pandemic, COVID times. And I just watched it for the first time recently, and I remember seeing it advertised back in 2020, where new releases were nearly at a standstill with our own real life disaster. And I remember being interested, but also kind of chuckling at the fact that a Gerard Butler disaster film was the most interesting looking release at the time. But after watching it finally 4 years later, I've got to say that I got a lot more out of this film than I expected. And is it great? Perhaps not. But it hits a lot of marks a disaster film should, and it hits it fairly well. You get some interesting effects, action, characters coping with the chaos in different ways, feeling some feels with the high levels of danger and death. It's nothing particularly unique in the subgenre, but at nearly 2 hours, it does also feel kind of long, but I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. Almost like a decent epic adventure as his family travels place to place, bad news after bad news, and also Butler gives a stellar performance. In this trio, this family, all three of them really give an excellent performance together. They'll have great chemistry, they're completely believable as a family. And I was invested in their journey and hoping for their eventual safety that may or may not come. And as you watch, I don't think it's completely obvious how dark they are willing to take it in the end with these characters and the rest of the world. And stories like this can make you consider your existence and just make you question what you would do in this situation. And I came away from this with at least a little bit of extra gratitude for life and for family and those around me. And I wouldn't place this as my favorite disaster epic. It's not my favorite for sure, but it's a stellar effort. While there are some big effects, fire, comets, shrapnel hitting the earth, causing severe damage, the primary focus of this film is very much the human element and how our species reacts to news in different ways, reacts to chaos. Acceptance, grief, violence, fight and flight, and I just really love that about the writing here. We see the best and the worst of people, and it's really terrifying to see how it all unfolds and how far some people are willing to go. I'm sure this film would have been extra impactful back in 2020, but I think it still definitely works today, and even in the future. Now, I won't spoil the ending, of course, and how dark it may or may not go, but I found that the ending does work. My main concern with recommending it is that some people might find it slow and overlong, and I can understand, but me personally, I really enjoyed how they took their time with this journey and building these characters and trying to make you care about them. So I'll give Greenland a 7.3 out of 10. And now, for my fifth and final movie today, last but least. Least. Definitely least. But that is 2023's Meg 2, Just Watch Sharknado. Actually, it's called Meg 2 The Trench, but who really gives a shit? But anyways, with shark movies, most of them are just horrendous. Jaws is the obvious best, and most attempts just don't get what made that film so great. Although I really did love Deep Blue Sea as well, and that's very nostalgic for me. With the Meg, the first one, I remember liking it, not loving it. It's not a great movie, but a really fun time. I mean, it's a big-ass fucking shark, a megalodon. Why not? And Meg 2, it definitely leaned more into satire and humor a bit more this time around. And that could have worked, but overall, the lack of charisma with most of the actors, the lack of chemistry, and it's just mostly bland, run-of-the-mill action, and it really also lacks laughs in many places. I don't think the sequel really works for me at all. And keep in mind, I've loved some shitty movies. I've given a couple shitty movies decent scores on my channel just because of my enjoyment of them and the entertainment value I think they have. And this night, my wife and I watched this movie. Also keep in mind, We were a few hours into drinking on a Saturday night, and I still found myself fairly annoyed with the pacing and the decision making of the story. And I'm aware that the creators of this film are self aware and they were fine making a bad movie just for fun. But I just found it surprising that it still lacks fun and excitement, actually. I don't think I got much of that, even when intoxicated. It has its moments, but should have been 90 minutes for starters rather than nearly 2 hours. I'll probably never watch this one again, in any condition, especially sober. But I just really didn't care about what was happening 90% of the time. The new gimmick was spending a good bit of the film on the ocean floor, the trench, and getting attacked down there instead. And that's a cool idea. That's about it. I didn't expect the shark to look great, I didn't, but I didn't expect it to look so odd and ugly. And not scary ugly. Not Victor Crowley from the Hatchet films, not Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, not the humanoid creatures in The Descent. Those creatures, or those people, are ugly as shit and scary, with the ugliness adding that extra touch to really drive the terror home more. But the Megs here are simply fucking ugly. And rather goofy. But anyway, the first and even second act does feel like it drags, but we do get a ridiculous, slightly more entertaining third act, this time near a beach. And while it's not exactly what I would have wanted from this final act, it's still much more fun with the action and the intentional humor. Just turn your brain off, bloated fun, and that's fine. And you do get, like on the movie poster, Jason Statham somehow fleeing a Meg on a jet ski. Fuck yes, and it was glorious. Just what this movie needed. And there's also some references to Jaws, of course, and they're not great, but they exist. And Jason Statham apparently said that he was disappointed with this movie, with the lighter tone they took and the lack of bloodshed. And I can see where he's coming from, partly. And the first Meg wasn't completely serious either, I don't believe, if I remember correctly. But it wasn't quite this over the top with their attempts at humor, from what I remember. So, more bloodshed maybe could have worked. Some better attempts at excitement and a halfway okay story would have been welcomed. But in this day and age, at this point, a Megalodon flick really probably shouldn't take itself too seriously. I just think they should have done a better job with what they're trying. I just feel like if you're going to watch a shark film this bad, this piss poor, just go ahead and binge all the Sharknado movies. That one completely leans to that side, to that comedic side. It's bad. Just watch that instead. So I would watch the Meg again, the first one, someday, but likely not this one, unless I just had to for some reason. It doesn't quite get to that guilty pleasure mark for me. You may disagree, and I hope you do like it more than I did. But I'm going to give Meg 2 The Trench a 4.5 out of 10. Alright, well that'll bring me to the end of this quick movie review episode. Let me know how you feel about these. Are they detailed enough? Would you like a spoiler section no matter what? But for now, I had a great time discussing these films and putting my thoughts out there. And like I said, I really did enjoy most of these, at least to a certain extent. And let me know what you'd like to hear next from me. I do have more reviews on the way, so let me know if there's anything in particular you want to hear. And please follow my social media if you'd like. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe if you want to hear more from me. But for now, I'll see you guys next time on The Entertainment Room.